Now, there were more shudders in world financial markets today following yesterday's announcement that the Dubai World Holding Company, the flagship financial vehicle for the glitziest of the United Arab Emirates, wanted a 6-month breather from its creditors on debt repayments. In fact, after yesterday's falls, the FTSE rallied today, but there are still jitters about the significance of what Dubai has done. Our economics editor Paul Mason now assesses whether Dubai is just one of the significant aftershocks of the credit crunch or perhaps a sign of new misery to come.
The tacky, glitzy paradise that rose up out of the desert like a miracle. It looked too good to be true. It was. Since Dubai World announced it wanted a break from paying its debts, fear and turmoil have stalked the financial markets. It was all built with borrowed money.
This was a blue chip investment haven for international companies, for international businesses. If you go to Dubai now, there's still all the major companies are there, and that's because they had confidence in the place. That confidence has disappeared. If Dubai can go, anywhere can go.
Dubai World owes $58 billion. $25 billion of that will now be restructured. It's owned by the Dubai government, whose total external debt comes to $80 billion. Banks are being tight-lipped about their direct exposure, but RBS was the biggest underwriter of loans to Dubai World over the past 2 years, while credit specialists believe HSBC and Standard Chartered are among the Western banks most exposed. It had been thought that the neighbouring emirate of Abu Dhabi would bail out any problems in Dubai, but it didn't.
I think investors naively assumed that Abu Dhabi would step up to the plate, and they may well do in the end. But at the present time, especially because there are holidays, it's a weekend in the Middle East, there's a great deal of uncertainty. And it's that level of uncertainty which has sent the markets into a tiz.
Dubai's economic development story has been about defying nature, golf courses in the desert, new islands in the Persian Gulf. But it couldn't defy the laws of economics.
Part of the problem is transparency in Dubai. It was a city of good news, the ultimate sunshine state, as I like to call it. If you have the government media only printing good news on the economy, you think it's a fairly safe bet. In the last several months, even though the credit crunch reached the Gulf shores, including Dubai, investors continued to think this was the case because of the apparent backing of rich sister emirate Abu Dhabi, which of course has massive sovereign wealth funds and substantial oil and gas reserves. So what Dubai had really been doing for the last few months is soothing investors, saying, look, you know, Abu Dhabi's going to come and help us here.
But one Duff desert paradise does not make a global panic. Problem is, Dubai is not the only country in the world whose sovereign debt is looking dodgy. In fact, it was not even top of the list. As measured by the cost of borrowing, the country most likely to default is Ukraine, followed by Venezuela, Argentina and Pakistan. Closely behind Dubai come Latvia, Iceland, Lithuania and Romania, with California in with a bullet at number 10. And Dubai's problems are not just a problem for Britain's banks. There are tens of thousands of Brits who work there.
You have 100,000 UK nationals living in the UAE. All of them are largely working. A lot of these people will be working for Dubai government entities. There's quite likely to be considerable redundancies over there. At the same time, you have all the leading contractors and consultants who've been working on the Dubai dream, building Palm Island, building the world's largest building. Now they are in trouble because they've not been paid for 9 to 12 months.
So as the world weeps over the broken dreams of celebrities, footballers' wives, rich oil sheikhs and property speculators, the watchword in Dubai is, I'm an investor, get me out of here.
Paul Mason, I'm joined now by Gillian Tett of the Financial Times and Alan Ardasso of Rubini Global Economics. Put this into perspective for us. How big a deal is this? Is this just Dubai being slightly peculiar, or is it something that we should all worry about?
Well, Dubai per se is not that huge if you look at its position relative to the global financial system. So if Dubai does default on part of its debt, and we don't really know that yet, that's not going to blow a hole in the balance sheet of too many banks. That's too significant. But what is very significant is that the problems exposed at Dubai are actually not that different in some ways from those other sovereign credits, other countries. And so right now you have investors looking at other countries and saying, Well, if this has happened in Dubai, could it happen elsewhere?
I suppose that's what people are worried about. Is this just an aftershock of what we've already had, or is this the beginning of a new wave of wretchedness for all of us?
I think it's the beginning of a new wave of differentiation. I agree with Gillian. I think people are going to look much more carefully at balance sheets and see what's actually going on. In the run-up to this crisis, the officials in Dubai had said to the market, don't worry, we're good for it, everything's going to be okay. And people appeared to have bought into that because when things turned out not to be okay, there was a big sell-off. So I think we're now in a phase where it's becoming clear that the credit crunch is continuing, and the marginal credits in the system that got too much credit before, they're not getting any now. They can't refinance, so they're going to have to default, or something else is going to have to be adjusted.
Does that play into something we've talked about a lot over the past year, which is psychology? In other words, if you think it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad.
Absolutely, it certainly does. And I think one of the really key things about what's happened in Dubai is that investors are starting to question what is called implicit guarantees, i.e. the idea that a government is going to back a company or an entity even though it's not actually written down on paper. Now, in the case of Dubai, essentially Dubai World, this company called Nakheel, enjoyed implicit guarantees from the Dubai government, which in turn enjoyed implicit guarantees from Abu Dhabi. So the whole thing kind of rested on faith. But the problem is that when that kind of trust starts to crumble, it can get very infectious. And if you look, say, closer to home at a country like, say, Greece, which has, many people assume could never have a serious financial crisis because it has implicit guarantees by being a member of the euro, well, again, there are people out there saying, well, hang on a sec, just how good are those implicit guarantees, just by way of one example?
Should Britain be worried? In other words, are banks with big investments over there, or is it more trouble ahead for all the banks we've already just bailed out?
Well, it's clear that the British banks are more exposed than banks of other countries. It's also clear, I think, that some of the better, stronger British banks are more exposed than they have been to other problems until now. But I think, at the end of the day, as Gillian said at the outset, right, the relative size of this problem by itself, the Dubai problem and the Nakheel problem itself, is small compared to what we've already been through in the last quarter of last year and the first quarter of this year.
But then Gillian also made the link to possibly Greece, and we saw Venezuela, Ukraine, and so on. I mean, I think
the key thing to realize right now is in the last 2 years of the credit crisis, we've really been looking a lot at, say, mortgage debt, at corporate debt to a lesser extent. I think in some ways we are starting to move into a new phase where people are increasingly looking at the issue of sovereign debt. Because, of course, the magic wand, if you like, that's helped us to paper over a lot of the cracks and get us out of the worst crisis earlier this year has been big spending by the governments. And I think the question people are asking in many regions of the world right now is just how sustainable is that going to be?
Well, if we're talking about sovereign debt, we could talk about Britain as well, couldn't we? I mean, we're not anywhere near Greece or Venezuela or anything else, but it is certainly a problem for us as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's a problem throughout the developed world, right? Public debt in this country is going to double over a period of time. It's pretty clear that public debt in the United States is also going to double. I think one of the lines of defense, if you like, is that the policy debate in this country is moving very quickly towards fiscal adjustment, right? And that's one of the kind of front burner issues in the coming election campaign, and I think that's because the kind of the boundaries of fiscal solvency are much closer in the United Kingdom than many other large economies, right? Eventually that will be a problem in other countries as well.
Julie?
But if there's one key lesson from the whole Dubai debacle, it's about the issue about political clarity. Because something that's left many investors very upset is that the rulers of Dubai said just a few days ago that they were going to protect the creditors, that they weren't going to mess around with the debt. And yet suddenly they did this U-turn that frankly no one can really understand because people have gone off on holiday.
And that's a holiday. And
exactly. And if there's one moral for the British government, it's that when they do come to try and restructure the fiscal position, they need to be pretty clear and they don't need to try and play around with the markets.
And not go on holiday.
And not go on holiday at a crucial moment, definitely not.
Thank you both very much.